The 2025 MLB trade deadline came and went, with a flurry of moves coming at the last moment. So, for those of you who weren't able to catch all the action but still want to know how each team overall performed, here's every MLB team's trade deadline in 20 seconds or less, with a corresponding letter grade as well, which will largely be context dependent on what a team's stated goals were prior to the deadline and how they went about fulfilling those. Let's start first with the Diamondbacks. They were able to trade a large portion of their expiring veterans and get back a lot of value, though it seems that perhaps they left a little bit of prospect capital on the table relative to what other teams were able to get, especially for Suarez, a very strong A tier. The A's didn't make some of the moves people expected them to, like with Luis Severino specifically, but they did pull off one massive, potentially franchise-altering deal for a consensus top 5 prospect in the sport, Leo DeVries, and some solid pitching prospects. For what they gave up, this was a hell of a deal, and deadline as a result. S tier. The Braves were exceptionally quiet despite the fact that Marcell Ozuna, their big potential trade piece, is set to be a free agent at the end of this season, and there are probably a couple other moves they could have made as well. Certainly not the worst, but not good at all. D tier. The Orioles were one of those teams that traded basically everything they had to trade, and got back a ton of prospect capital, even if none of it was exceptionally elite. Still, for a team that's looking to retool rather than rebuild, I think loading up the farm system ahead of an offseason where they could swing some major trades was a great move. S tier. Despite reports that were nearly verified that Joe Ryan was indeed going to Boston, turns out that he actually is staying put in Minnesota. This took what was going to be a very good deadline for the Red Sox and knocks it down a peg, as they still were able to get some usable pieces, but nobody that should be enough to put them over the top of the other teams in their division. C tier. The Cubs didn't go out and make some of the seismic moves that some of the other teams I'm going to talk about did, but they did do a decent amount to shore up their depth in some problem areas, and without having to trade any of their major prospects in the process. The team didn't need a lot, and they didn't go above and beyond as such. B tier. For everything the White Sox had to trade, I personally am slightly disappointed they weren't able to swing some kind of deal for the recently red-hot Luis Robert, with them only moving 2 major players and not getting anything especially notable in their returns for them either. D tier. The Reds acquired some major complementary pieces to their roster that has been doing well as of recently, helping them to plug some of the holes that have been holding them back all season, and much like a couple other teams we've mentioned so far, didn't have to overpay in the process. B tier. The Guardians only made one semi-major trade involving Shane Bieber, and it does seem like the return, Carl Steffen, has a chance to be pretty good, especially in Cleveland's development system. Still, I think there was more they could have done. C tier. The Rockies did indeed end up moving their 2 major pieces they had to play with this deadline, in Jake Bird and Ryan McMahon, and got back some solid prospects in the process, which their franchise desperately needs as of now. A solid B tier. The Tigers ended up going with a stuff versus results approach, which has worked for them in the past in some pretty notable cases. However, based on how good they've been for a large portion of this season, I'm pretty sure their fan base expected at least one semi-sure thing, and they certainly had the prospect capital to do it. D tier. The Astros pushed all their chips in by acquiring 3 hitters, including former Houston superstar Carlos Correa, in the final hours before the deadline. Will this be enough to help them make a deep playoff run with what feels like half the opening day roster on the IL? We'll have to see, but I do appreciate the gusto. A tier. In a surprising turn of events, the Royals decided to actually soft buy this year despite a lot of the rumbling that they might sell off some major pieces. I'm not crazy about what they did on paper, and I don't think it's going to be enough to push them over the edge in any meaningful way, but I also didn't hate it. C tier. The Angels always seem to have very confusing deadlines, with in recent days a ton of rumors that they were going to sell, yet instead deciding to add a couple mediocre relievers and a struggling middle infielder. The fact they weren't able to get any future value at a time when they desperately need it makes this our first and only F tier performance. The Dodgers were certainly active, though not in the grand way I think some people predicted they might be. Still, the players they got helped them address obvious needs, especially with Brock Stewart, and it does seem like they're more so taking the approach of trying to get healthy versus leveraging future value. B tier. The Marlins only made a couple moves, dealing both Nick Fortes and Jesus Sanchez, but for both it seems they got competitive returns. They also notably didn't trade Sandy Alcantara, which, considering what his value is right now, doesn't seem like a bad move. C tier. As is typical, the Brewers didn't make any real major splash to complement a roster that's been doing well for a couple months now, largely swapping Major League talent for Major League talent in the kind of savvy way they usually do. I didn't hate or love any of this really. C tier. The Twins officially threw in the towel for this season by selling off basically everything they had of value, completely resetting the team's minor league system and launching them into a full-blown rebuild. And while I don't know if I agree with this franchise direction, I do admire them for completely committing to it. A tier. The Mets come in now as our first truly major buyer, with them somewhat throwing caution to the wind while acquiring 4 notable players they desperately needed for their roster construction. They are 100% in on 2025, and when you add what they did to an already very good roster, you might just have a team capable of making a major run at winning it all. S tier. A lot of Yankee fans were sweating when they hadn't done much a couple hours before the deadline, but a flurry of last-minute moves completely remade what had been a struggling bullpen into one of the most dominant in the sport, along with picking up a couple notable depth pieces. Much like the Mets, their chips are forward. S tier. The Phillies certainly had to do something to respond to the Mets' flurry of moves, and they did so by acquiring one of the best relief pitchers in the game today, Joan Duran, as well as some decent outfield help in Harrison Bader. While it wasn't the seismic moves of their division rival, it still was pretty significant in a positive way. A tier. The Pirates did what they had set out to do when the deadline was approaching: sell all major pieces that had any value, aside from Tommy Pham, funny enough. While I'm not crazy about prolonging the eternal rebuild, you can't argue they got back some decent pieces for what they gave up. B tier. The Padres probably bought the most of any team this year, adding a ton of major league talent while largely emptying the farm system of much of its value. Still, because many on their roster are starting to age, and a number of the guys they acquired will be controllable during that closing window, I do think it was probably the appropriate move for them. In S tier today, but we'll have to see how it ages. If you told Giants fans a month and a half ago that they would be sellers, they probably wouldn't have believed you, but on the heels of a really tough stretch, they decided to dip into their bullpen and outfield and acquire an absolute boatload of prospects, though none of them were exceptionally elite. A tier. The Mariners were another of the squads that decided 2025 was going to be the season they laid it all on the line, grabbing two of the top hitters available in Josh Naylor and Eugenio Suarez, and a useful bullpen arm from the Pirates as well. For a team and city desperately yearning for a playoff run, this couldn't have come at a better time. S tier. The Cardinals ended up being soft sellers, shipping off closer Ryan Helsley and a couple other bullpen arms for what seems to be a pretty solid package of players. Is it franchise-altering? No, but it should definitely help in the long term. B tier. The Rays pulled what we're used to seeing them doing pretty much every year, acquiring players they value and shipping off players they don't as much, filling in holes in the roster in the process, and I do think they are the better for it. B tier. The Rangers had a semi-active deadline, adding Merrill Kelly and a couple of arms that should help shore up the bullpen. However, considering they've struggled all year offensively and did nothing to address that, I don't know how I could rate this any higher than C tier. The Blue Jays kind of split the difference between what the other teams in their division had done, deciding not to go all out in pursuit of a postseason run, while still adding some key talent in places of need. I like what they did, but I'm not blown away by it. B tier. The Nationals were probably one of the most active teams over the last couple days, though none of their moves could be designated as major. They sold what they could sell, and got back what seems to be fair market value. Considering that's what they were setting out to do in the first place, I'm going to put this in B tier. Alright, that was every MLB team's deadline performance in 20 seconds or less. Be sure to let me know if you agree or disagree, and drop any recommendations in the comments below for similar ideas. Also, one more thing. Who do you think won the overall trade deadline? Who do you think the best player traded was? And who do you think is most going to regret the deals they made 5 years from now? Now, thank you so much for watching, and please remember that if you ever see anything you'd like to see detailed in the Made the Cut video, whether that be a specific play, player, or narrative surrounding a team or something, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I do end up using your idea, I'll of course give you a shout out. Thank you so much once again, and I'll see you in the next one.